Hey guys, I've been having a lot of conversations lately with product and design folks. A few weeks ago, I opened up some strategy sessions to talk about Figma's new MCP server and how teams could leverage it to structure their design systems into prompt-based prototyping. But to be honest, it turned out that the conversation went into a lot more than just that. So I keep getting asked a lot of the same kind of questions about AI in product, like where do we start? What tools do we use? Is this going to replace my team? I figured I'd share my thoughts on how I've been responding to that. And a lot of this is new, but I have the benefit of seeing some of the challenges in different companies, different industries. And so I thought I'd just share how I'm seeing things. Hopefully it's helpful for you and your team. So the first thing is when I talk about tools, and hopefully this is fairly self-evident, but tools like Figma, MCP Server, Cursor, V0, Lovable, all of them, they're just tools. They're not solutions or workflows in themselves, right? They're just bridges. Tools are important, but they're not magic. They don't solve system problems. So Cursor, for example, is an amazing, very powerful tool. I use it like every day at this point. But if your code base is messy or your component structure isn't consistent, it'll produce more confusion than clarity in a lot of cases, especially for the folks who are maybe non-devs trying to use it. They're not going to get the productivity if the system is not set up. Before you throw tools at the problem, you have to ask, are we giving the tools anything meaningful to connect to? And so that brings me to my second point here, which is something that we say all the time here, but good AI requires two things, two levers that really make it work well: good context and good instruction. So this is one of those truths which I wish every team would sort of print out, stick on the wall, but most teams underestimate how brittle or not useful LLMs can be without the proper structure and scaffolding. So context isn't just feeding it raw data, documents, things like that, but it's really structured intent. So in the world of product and design, that's semantic component names, design tokens that are coded for meaning and not just styling, documentation that's machine readable, and things like that. And on the flip side, you have instruction, right? And so when we say instruction, we're not just talking about the prompts that you give to ChatGPT or to Cursor or to V0. These are about the system level things you've set up to teach the tools how you like to receive outputs, how you like them to respond, the tone, the style, the code structures, all of that. So it's all the reusable workflows, the governance, the feedback loops that you're creating that shape how that model, how the AI model performs with those tools. So the third thing is the fact that most teams today are still stuck at what I'll call task level automation. You know, it's kind of using AI. I don't mean this in a bad way, but using AI like a smart intern, right? So it's like, write me a JIRA ticket, draft this UX copy, summarize this document, right? So as a practitioner, as an IC, that's what you should be doing, right? You should be optimizing things within your responsibility, within your remit area. As a leader, the real opportunity is when you start applying AI to cross-functional workflows. So imagine a flow, not just doing the things that I just described before, but updating a design in Figma or marking it as ready, and then it auto-generates dev tickets in Jira. It updates test cases or creates test cases in your QA tools. It drafts release notes. It's all fairly deterministic with a low risk, low margin for hallucinations or something or bad outputs that are going to reach the customer and cause any like real negative effects, right? So these are fairly easy things that you can do, but it creates a lot of power and time savings across a whole workflow of things. And that's just a very simple sort of example. But this is where you kind of upgrade the AI from being an assistant or just a co-pilot for your specific task and being more like another part of the team, so to speak. So the fourth point is that we're at a time when we're moving from artifact-based work to system-based work. So it's a subtle shift, but it changes everything. And I'll explain what I'm talking about. Most product teams still run on artifacts. Artifacts is the center of gravity of where and how and why all work happens. PRDs, specs, mocks, presentations. There is a large amount of time spent on perfecting and optimizing these particular assets, like the assets and documents themselves. As we know, these are just snapshots, right? They capture decisions at a point in time. The difference that we see is many orgs have already been starting to move this way, but especially like AI native orgs are moving towards more like living artifacts, living systems, documents and tickets that are dynamically generated, right? Product backlogs that are not treated like Bible, but treated as like a data set that you can access, you know, and update and edit. This is all to say we're at a time where we are kind of reorienting our time towards optimizing these artifacts for how well they can communicate at any point in time in the product lifecycle versus how polished they are at one point in time. So that's I think that's a key distinction, especially for large organizations where there is a lot of political weight put behind the quality of those assets. And I think that's changing in more sort of faster, iterative, nimble organizations. So the next point is basically don't boil the ocean. Start with one high value use case and go from there. One of the biggest pitfalls that I see is teams trying to create, like a 12 to 16 month AI roadmap before they've shipped one single useful automation. I think it's easy, especially for very systems minded folks, to want to cover breadth and get everything cohesive instead of covering depth and getting good at one thing and making sure that's adopted and people see the value. So instead, we coach teams to find, that one low risk but high value repetitive task, put AI on it, automate it, create a use case that becomes valuable for a lot of people. Maybe it's auto-generating release notes. Maybe it's a very simple design linting plugin that's going to save you a bunch of QA time. Maybe it's building a prompt library to synthesize research. Find that use case, and then the organizational sort of motivation will come from seeing the value of that. So one of the exercises that we often teach to help companies prioritize is doing the complexity versus data structure matrix. And so basically think of like a 2x2 kind of matrix. One axis you have tasks that are high complexity versus low complexity. The other axis you're thinking about your data sources, so structured versus unstructured data. So you want to start where there's a lot of data structure and the complexity is maybe a little low, but the output is clearly like very valuable for the company. That's your low-hanging fruit right there, right? That's the area where you can make immediate impacts, like in the next few weeks, probably. And then you go up the quadrant and you start to look at, okay, where is there structured data and more complex tasks, you know, things that have more moving pieces to it. So that's where you want to start thinking about where to get some investment and where to place your bets. Those are the things that you can use, those early wins, to create some motivation and momentum to attack like bigger problems. So that's where we always say like how to start. So the sixth point is kind of a summary of everything. AI is not really about a shift in tools, right? It's really about a mindset shift. So a lot of companies say we want to integrate AI, but the way that manifests itself is we want to use new tools. But if the mindset doesn't shift, the tools won't really stick. So the main thing is that teams and companies need to get more comfortable with using AI, at least internally. It means they need to be comfortable with like imperfect first drafts, higher iteration velocity, and the fact that some outputs will be like AI generated and not handcrafted. For example, take PRDs. We worked with a team where, PMs spent like 8-10 hours, like a week, writing documentation, just writing these PRDs, getting all the specs right, but we wanted to give them their time back. So we were able to do that by replacing most of the PRD writing with giving them the ability to create prototypes straight with functioning code, like right from the design system using approved components. They were able to do that with tools like Cursor. So they use that as a tool for communication to design and development, and they didn't have to wait for design and development resources to free up for them to be able to do that. But this only worked because they changed how they thought about ownership of artifacts, the fidelity that they needed to accomplish, and the way they collaborated with one another. So they saved a bunch of time, and they were able to communicate a lot better, a lot more accurately, and a lot more fluidly with one another. That kind of leads into the seventh point, which is the EPD model, the engineering product design model, the three-legged stool that has been in place probably for the last, 15 or plus years. I feel like that's going to become very fluid over the next 2 to 3 years. And I think that's a good thing. And this isn't about job displacement or anything like that. I think most forward-thinking organizations aren't really gatekeeping between those rules anymore. Designers are writing code, engineers are doing UX, product managers are like running research ops, the kind of roles are kind of blending all over the place. And in the right kind of environment, that creates speed, creativity, and honestly better morale amongst the team because there's trust. People feel safe doing it. Where it doesn't work is if you are worried about your job as a result of this, which brings me kind of to my last and maybe my most important point, which is this shift doesn't really start from the bottom, right? It starts with leadership. So people on teams are already experimenting, right? They're already using the tools. They're already getting pretty good at them, but they're doing them in their own silos. What they need is permission. permission to experiment further across their immediate swim lanes, permission to blur the lines a little bit, the permission to produce things that are not perfect for the sake of communicating more fluidly and creating prototypes faster. I'll give you two examples of ways that are not how you give permissions. So one thing we've seen, and we've all seen these in the headlines, is where leaders are basically top down saying you must use AI now. It's do or die, adopt or ship out. Obviously, that does not create psychological safety. That doesn't create any kind of cohesion. It doesn't even get into the how. How are we supposed to adopt? How are we supposed to use it? This is not my favorite way of how I'd go about it. And I don't think that's a good way of giving permission. The other way that's equally not as good, which is, okay, everyone has a license to ChatGPT now, or everyone has a license to use Cursor now. Have fun. Tell us when you're able to 2x your productivity. That's also not helpful, right? It doesn't create any sense of trust. It doesn't create a sense of how or mission or values on how we're supposed to use things. The truth is something that's different than either of those. But a big part of what we do is coach and teach teams on adoption strategies and rollout strategies for AI and how to create both the mission and purpose and psychological safety for how to use the tools. AI is not just about the tools. It's about the systems. It's about leadership. It's how we choose to work with one another. We and I really believe that how teams build products is changing in a way that it hasn't in the past couple decades. It's kind of a really exciting time. And if this is a shift that you're exploring and you want to have a roadmap or some guidance on how to get there, let's talk. We're happy to trade notes and provide some advice and guidance, and we can certainly help with that. So next week, Super Friendly is actually doing a live session where we demo how to start prompting prototypes with Cursor and Figma MCP. And we'll cover a lot more as well, from implications on teams, how to encode design intent into design systems and what that means for your system, and a whole lot more. Hopefully we'll see you there. But thanks for listening to this. Hopefully it was helpful for you and your teams. If you have any questions, I'd love to chat.